It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 724 of Accelerate. That is episode 724 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. I have another great episode lined up for you today. My guest is Jens Hentschel. And Jens is the founder and managing director of the Fivis Partnership. Now, the Fivis Partnership, which is based in London, helps procurement teams around the world become more customer-centric and strategic to the organizations that they're part of. Now, here's the interesting thing. Through their work, the Fivis Partnership has also grown into a new role, which is helping sales teams understand how to work more effectively and efficiently with procurement. Now, there's this general sense among sellers that procurement is the enemy. And if you've been in sales for any length of time, you probably have a horror story of your own to share about dealing with procurement. Maybe even a story about how procurement derailed a deal at the last minute that you're working on. But the fact is that sales and procurement need to be able to work together increasingly in many organizations in order to deliver value to the respective organizations they represent. So in our conversation today, Jens and I are going to dive into procurement and how procurement and sales should work together. You know, it's interesting. There's a lot of talk these days. We've all heard it about what modern sales is and what that means in terms of how you structure and operate your sales process. But today from Jens in our conversation, you're going to start learning what modern procurement is and the strategic role that procurement is increasingly tasked to fill in the organizations that they represent, and what this means for how sales should work with procurement. I mean, lots of experts will try to convince you that procurement should be avoided at all costs, but as Jens and I get into today, what if knowing how to work with procurement actually was the key that unlocked your ability to close certain deals? Well, we're going to get to this and much more today. But before I get to Jens, I want to take a quick second to talk about the Sales House. It is the sales performance training community for B2B sellers. You know, in the typical sales training, you learn a lot of things, really with the exception of how to win. You know, in sales, winning orders is not the result of a process or method you use. It comes from executing lots of small things well, actually savagely well, like I like to say. So in the Sales House, I focused on teaching you the behaviors and skills you don't learn in sales training. The essential skills that make the decisive difference in your ability to win new deals. So come learn how to sell with more confidence, trust, and value. And we have a special offer today for listeners of Accelerate if you visit the Sales House. That is thesaleshouse.com/accelerate. And enter your code SELLMORE10. That's SELLMORE, SELLMORE, all in uppercase, and the number 10. This will earn you a 10% discount on your first year's membership in the Sales House. So make sure you stop by thesaleshouse.com/accelerate. We'll look forward to seeing you there. All right, let's jump into it. Jens, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. So you're joining us from the UK today. Where in particular are you?
In London.
In London. Okay.
Yeah.
One of my favorite cities.
It's not too bad. But I'm originally from Germany, Andy. So I'm living here now for around about 3 years.
Okay. And do you enjoy the change?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's a fantastic city. It's so international. You meet people from all over the world. And, maybe some of your listeners are aware of Brexit and all that stuff that goes on in the UK. So let's see how long they allow me to live here. So we'll see. Huh?
Oh, that's right. I hadn't really thought about that. So if Brexit goes through, then the sort of open borders thing goes away?
Well, so they say, right? I mean, there was one big demand from the people that pushed for Brexit to say, look, we want to control our borders. And at the moment, it's a free flow in Europe. Obviously, you can work in Spain, in Germany, in the UK, wherever you want, as long as you're a European citizen. And that is something that they obviously want to change. What they want to put in place is obviously not known. So there's a lot of uncertainty, unfortunately. In the UK, in the economy at the moment, which is not good. But hey, it drags on now for 3 years, and I'm not so confident that they're going to find a solution by actually Halloween. That's a deadline.
Yeah, I know that's an appropriate deadline, by the way.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if they put Boris Johnson in charge. So the UK's own version of our president. So All right, so we're going to talk about something really different here today. For anything else that we've covered before in Accelerate, is we're going to talk about procurement, and this is something that you're a procurement expert. You spent your career in procurement, but I mean, tell us a little bit about your background, and then tell us about the work that you're doing at your company.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're absolutely right, Andy. I mean, I'm really passionate about procurement. I fundamentally believe procurement is the best function in the world. Maybe just behind sales, I don't know, but I definitely feel procurement, at least for me personally, gave me a lot in my career. My company at the moment, I founded the Fivis Partnership 2 years ago with a few ex-colleagues from Procter & Gamble of mine. And our mission is really to go into procurement teams and to help them to become more customer-centric, more strategic, more to drive more operational excellence. And as I said, we started that 2 years ago, and just a few months into our journey, actually some of our ex-suppliers and account managers from the companies that we've dealt with contacted us and said, "Look, Jens, could you not, explain us a little how procurement operates, what their KPIs are, because we perceive them a little bit as a black box." And to be open and honest with you, Andy, that was a shock to us, because we weren't really aware. I mean, we thought that we on the procurement side, on the buying side, were fairly transparent. We were collaborative. We were always interested in the win-win, and
sellers thought you were the enemy.
That's what we realized. we weren't aware of that at all.
Right.
So these guys came and asked us, "Hey, could you not, shed a little bit of light and then explain us on how we can better, build relationships with you guys on the buying side?" And so that's what we do now more and more. We still are very, very active in consulting procurement teams, but there's more and more sales organizations that we now consult and advise and try to relay the message that procurement actually doesn't need to be your enemy. They can actually be your best friend if you just try to understand them a little and maybe speak their language a little. And so that is what we do with passion, because I think fundamentally, Andy, sales and procurement need to work together to deliver value for the respective organization that they work for. When they work against each other, then it will end up in disaster. That's my personal view.
All right. Well, we're gonna get into that, because I think that's really worth exploring. Because as you look at any complex sale, is with multiple stakeholders, invariably one of the stakeholders is procurement, and there's this whole body of thought, if you will, that some people have expressed recently in books. One of my colleagues, Mike Weinberg, just wrote a book in which he talks about the procurement pit, quote unquote, the procurement pit.
Right.
And that's a certain perspective that I don't necessarily agree with everything he wrote about that, but based on my own experience. But let's sort of start from that point. Is what do sellers get wrong about working with procurement? What do they get wrong about their perspective about procurement? Just let's start at that point.
Yeah. But on that very point, since you mentioned, sales philosophy and sales training, I mean, I obviously then throughout, the 2 years that we are on this journey in this company as the Fivis Partnership, obviously I came across a lot of sales trainings as well. And that is something that surprised me very much, that in many of these methodologies, procurement is positioned as the entity or the organization that you need to avoid at all costs. What I found out is that most sales trainings tell you build a great relationship with the internal requisitioner, with your direct user of your service or product, and try to build a strong relationship there, and ideally against the procurement team, and which is probably in hindsight, looking back at my professional career, which frustrated me the most with suppliers and account managers, that they thought that they already had the deal agreed with the internal stakeholder, and just I was just meant to be there to pretty much, put the contracts in place, or like an admin person, pretty much taking meeting minutes or something.
Yeah, rubber stamp it. Yes, as we say.
Exactly. And I think this is probably the biggest mistake that you can do as seller these days, that you underestimate the role procurement can play and is supposed to play in an organization. And to be then trapped in this political game where I, as buyer, probably need to make it very clear to my internal customer, let's say an IT director or a marketing director or whoever is requesting a service or a product. I obviously, as a procurement person, need to make it very obvious then that I'm there to deliver value. And probably I do it on the supplier's expense then, right? So I will probably push you very hard on price just to showcase internally that procurement is not something that everybody can do. It is actually something that requires skills. So I've seen that in many situations in my professional career, where probably some of my suppliers did fall into that pit. I would say I think that's definitely a pit where you try to outsmart procurement and form an alliance against procurement, which then backfires. And that's very unfortunate. Yeah.
Right. And so just to summarize that point so that people understand what you're saying is that not that you would necessarily have done this, though, is that if the procurement person feels like they're being backed into a corner, then the way they demonstrate that they still are involved in this process is saying, okay, fine, you back me into a corner. I'm just going to focus on really getting the best price out of you.
Yeah, let me give you an example, which is actually a real case that happened to me. Right, so I was a procurement leader for a large fast food chain. Let's not mention necessarily the name now, but so they had a top-down mandate from the CEO saying, "Look, procurement has to control all of our expenditures," and that's in most organizations that happens because of cost control or because of compliance reasons. That they say, "Look, we don't want everyone just to go right, left, and center and spend our company's money. Somebody has to look after it, right?"
Right.
And normally, when that happens, you obviously need to make sure that you have the processes in place, the organizational setup, the headcount, et cetera, et cetera. So in that particular case where I was in is that the procurement team was already managing very successfully all the raw material and the ingredients expenditures for the company, and we're now asked to also take over what we would call as procurement professionals indirect spend areas, so services, software, IT, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that rule pretty much came into place, and pretty much the day after, the IT director approached me and said, "Look, Jens, we have that software company come over tomorrow. And there's this new directive from the CEO, as you know, that we now need to involve procurement. But look, Jens, we've already agreed with that supplier that they're going to get the business for the next 3 years. We're very happy with them. They've been a good supplier to us. So can you just quickly come into the meeting and do whatever you have to do, because obviously now it's part of the deal." And obviously is not it's not a great position to be in, right? You feel that you just somebody that's taking the meeting minutes in the end of the day. So and I think it's not really that the IT director in that case was doing it because they didn't really believe in that this was required or not. But I think, especially in this, what we would call indirect, there is the perception of, I managed my budget for the last 10 years, and I want to continue to manage my budget. Why do I now need to involve somebody else in that process? So there might be a internal kind of
political issue
questioning.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in that particular case, I was obviously, you could say, a bit cornered. So I always describe it like a situation where you take your child to a toy store, and your child runs to the shelf and grabs out a Lego set and says, "Hey, daddy, I want this," and then you go to the shop assistant trying to ask for a discount. Right? This is pretty much the situation that I was in, where the IT director had already said, "We love you. The service is great, and now we have a meeting with procurement."
Right. Yep. And so, just to put some background to this, though, is that having been the case, the account executive from the software company now has told his boss, "I've got this deal." right?
I assume so. Yes, I assume so.
They've told me I've got it. So
right.
With that as a background, keep going with your story.
Yeah, so we went into that meeting, and it came to a bit of a shock and surprise to that account manager that all of a sudden procurement is in the room, right? Because just pretty much half an hour before the meeting, the IT director phoned him up and said, look, by the way, we have this new mandate. I don't really know why, but hey, there's going to be a procurement person present in the meeting. But you know what? I mean, we always told you that we want to make business with you, et cetera, et cetera. So,
and
so
again,
that came in.
Yeah, I'll step in. Sorry, not to interrupt the story, but yeah. So suddenly the salesperson, and not to risk our rating here on the show, but the salesperson has suddenly said, "Oh shit!" Right? That's that person's reaction when the IT director said, "Oh, by the way, no big deal, but procurement's going to be in the meeting." The reaction of the salesperson was, "Oh my gosh." All right.
At least that's what I could read in his face when I entered the room. Sure. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Because he didn't really know, right? He didn't really know why I was there. It wasn't really explained to him. He didn't know what power I would have.
Right.
I had zero. Between the two of us, Andy, I had zero understanding about IT. It was a software package that they were selling. I had no clue what that software was doing. Again, our team was more focused on raw materials and not really on software and services. So I had no clue, right? And since nobody asked me, I didn't tell him, obviously, that I had no clue.
Of course.
But I was obviously in that position that I had to show to the supplier that procurement has to play a role, and we need to be, considered in that process. And also, obviously, I had to show to my IT director that there is some value me being here, and I'm not just the one taking notes. So the discussion started, and I just felt that the account person got more and more nervous the more questions that I asked, right? And I felt probably a bit that maybe the commercial aspects of the deal weren't really considered as much in detail as should have been. So we obviously started a discussion on price, because that's where you can in the quickest way you can obviously articulate value, meaningful value to your internal customers. So we started a discussion on price, and I was just starting to ask questions, and the more questions that I asked, the lower the price became, and the account person, the account director, lowered the price without me really pushing for it. So we ended up with a deal where, yes, they got the business, because I couldn't obviously not allocate the business with them, because the IT director said we need that company. But the price ended up to be 20% lower than what was initially agreed. And that, again, wasn't really me pushing. It was me asking questions and maybe just being, curiously interested in what had been commercially discussed so far.
Right.
And I think the bottom line of the story, though, is yes, obviously they lost 20% on their margin. But the other thing is, I got actually quite suspicious, because if within half an hour, me being in a meeting, not knowing about anything about that particular product, I could lower the price by 20%. I actually put a couple of people onto the IT space to really see on what can we do strategically by identifying the right suppliers, the right partners, because it felt to me that probably we were being overcharged a little. Because again, investing only half an hour, getting a price reduction made me very suspicious. So I think the lesson out of this for salespeople that are listening to this is, I think in this very situation, you want to stay, very, very cool, and you want to obviously make sure that you save your internal customers' face, but also the face of the procurement person. So ideally, what I would have done, if I would have been in the sales in the sales situation, I would have probably asked for a second meeting, a separate meeting with procurement, just to understand what I actually had to do in all of this. I think this person got too nervous too quickly and overreacted.
Clearly,
for me, it would have been totally fine if it were just, okay, we give you a 3% discount or something. I would have been happy. The IT director would have been happy. The salesperson would have been happy. But as soon as you start getting nervous and uncertain and insecure, obviously that is something that a well-trained procurement person might be jump on immediately and might exploit that situation then. especially when you're in that political context that we were obviously in, right? So that can easily happen if you're not cautious.
Well, and so I think that leads to sort of the next discussion point, which is really what are the motivations of procurement, and we'll get into sort of how they're measured, and maybe we start there, how they're measured. But the general assumption for most sellers is procurement is just about getting the best price, and certainly, I think if you look at like in sales, where there's a spectrum of people that, some that do their job extremely well and some that aren't as adept at it, some who can do it very strategically, some who are very tactical, I think procurement professionals span the same spectrum, if you will. And clearly you're going to encounter procurement people who don't have enough skills to do anything but be focused on price. But I imagine that, if you're selling into a larger organization with a more senior procurement person, that I would imagine they have more strategic view on the procurement than just purely price. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And probably the first example that I gave you there is probably not a good example to describe what our KPIs are. In that very situation, again, it was a political situation where you had to quickly articulate internally what value you as procurement can bring to the party, right? But generally, I would say modern procurement teams, very mature procurement organizations, cost cutting, cost savings is no longer the KPI that gets you the promotion. Yes, we need to control cost. Yes, we all like a little bit of a discount. Yes, we all like to negotiate a bit, right? The back and forth. Yes,
sure.
We are a competitive bunch, right? As you guys are on the sales side. But cost savings and cutting costs or squeezing suppliers, that is something of the past, right? And I think this is a bit of the dilemma that we're in as procurement, because we've done that probably over the last 20 years very well to squeeze and drive out cost out of the system. And I think some organizations still think that way. But when you then go onto the other side, namely the internal stakeholders, the CEO and CFOs, what they are really after is actually to drive sales and to contribute to growth. And they want external capabilities. So suppliers, you guys, salespeople that really can, enable the whole organization to bring in innovation, to come up with new ideas and to drive sales and to contribute to growth. And that could easily be with a product that is 10, 20% more expensive than what I've bought before. So a lot of procurement organizations these days, when they articulate their strategies, so we, for instance, had a large FMCG company the other day that we consulted on their procurement strategy, and cost cutting, cost savings was no longer in their 5-year strategy. It was all about how can we find the best suppliers in the market that can bring in the innovation, that can support us on our sustainability journey to, serve the customer better. And you will always,
I just want to expand on that because I think that's such a critical point that is missed. And so, again, referring back to some of the writing is people talking about procurement pits and so on, is they're talking about a sense of procurement that's completely diametrically opposed to what you're describing, right? That in that case, it's talking about procurement just purely this perception on the part of sellers that procurement is just always about getting the best deal. And what you're saying is you're working with organizations and you see it yourself, is that the priority of procurement organizations now is really aligned with the internal stakeholders and the outcomes they want to achieve, which is growth, profitability, the strategic objectives of the company. And I just want to reiterate, you made that list of this client you're talking about. Cost cutting was not even on the top of the list at all.
Correct. Yeah. So, if just to describe how a strategic procurement organization should actually operate, right? And I'm not saying that all do.
Right.
Not everybody is there.
Right.
But I can assure you that everybody is striving to get to that stage where best practice in procurement is. And the first step there is really you need to fully understand what your internal business needs are. So a lot of time that we spend as professional buyers is actually with our internal stakeholders. So we sit with them, we consult with them, we try to challenge them on, is what you just articulated actually a want or is it actually a need, right? So we are this internal voice of reasoning pretty much to really find out what are your needs and requirements. And then when we found that out, to really determine do we have the internal capabilities to do some of the things that you need ourselves, one, or do we need external support, external capability and skills to, get to fulfill these requirements of yours, right? And that's where we would then engage through after having, come up with a sourcing strategy, that's how we would call it. Mm-hmm. We would then approach the market and investigate suppliers that could fulfill these needs. And the needs can be, we want to have innovation on a certain product line to win more market share in a certain country, for instance, or we want a software to make that process quicker. And so it not necessarily means that we need to cut costs. Yes, there could be a scenario where an internal stakeholder might say, look, we have a profitability issue somewhere. We need to find ways on how to reduce our expenditures. Clearly, then a goal of procurement is still to control costs in the right way. But the point here is in the right way. It's no longer cutting costs at all expenses, which probably some of us have done in the past. Absolutely, we're all guilty of that. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where most of these sales philosophies probably come from. That still look into these buyers that they've probably experienced over maybe 20 years ago, where everything was about price, everything was about cutting costs, and the opportunities back then were endless. With globalization, China opening up, you could just jump from one supplier to the other, and price were going down, and there was no end to it, right? But these days are over. These days are over. We went through, as a procurement organization, to a lot of scandals where we did cut costs, and it backfired badly at us in terms of quality, in terms of compliance, in terms of customer satisfaction and consumer satisfaction. So I think we learned our lessons the hard way, that yes, cost needs to be controlled, but don't push price at all costs.
Right.
You need to keep the company goals in mind and drive value for the organization.
Well, it seems like one of the things, and we're going to have multiple conversations because we're going to run out of time here, and I've got so many things I want to talk about. But it seems like one of the challenges here in this environment is that the procurement, I would suspect, and sellers each are clinging to outdated stereotypes of the other, right? So sellers still are clinging, and by and large, are still clinging to the stereotype vision of procurement as a roadblock, as an obstacle, as opposed to one of the stakeholders is going to help them get the job done. And I would suspect to some degree procurement people still look at salespeople as, very transactional, not adding a lot of value, and so on. I mean, is that true to some degree, I would think?
On the first part, yes. I mean, that's definitely what I realize more and more, that a lot of salespeople, sales community is perceiving procurement probably more as a block, and that is really concerning to me, as I said, because I believe that we should be working together. Mm-hmm. The second part, in terms of how we as procurement and buyers see and perceive sellers, I have to say, now that I know a little bit both sides, when I was still in my corporate role and not having that many insights on how you guys operate, I actually thought you probably knew a little bit better on how our company ticks. I always had
interesting.
I thought you always came across very professional to us, I have to say. And when I talk to procurement colleagues,
so what you're saying is that now that you've learned more about sales, what you're finding is actually sales is less competent than you thought they were before.
Now you're putting words in my mouth.
Well, no. But I don't. Hey, I'm a salesperson. I mean, it's
there you go.
Right, but in general, that's sort of what you're driving at is that, and I would say competent, but less sophisticated about the organization, the requirements of the organization, and helping them achieve their goals.
I thought they had fully understood that, okay, there's different stakeholders in the organization. Yes, one is the one that actually will consume my product or service, and the other one is a procurement person, the other one is the CEO, whoever it might be, right? And they have trainings on how to maybe play these people against each other or work collaboratively to drive more value. I thought that was what you guys were taught on in sales school, pretty much, which I now found out is not really the case, right? And I might be wrong there, where there's a certain level of anxiety about procurement, and if I would have known that, to be honest
tremendous.
with you, I probably would have acted in certain situations a bit differently. But now being in this in-between world, right, between sales and procurement, I fundamentally believe we need to explain those worlds on how you guys operate and how we operate.
Right.
Because fundamentally, we have an end consumer to serve, right? And these end consumers are getting more demanding every day, right? I bet you every of your listeners is on Amazon Prime and using Uber and gets their food delivered to their doorsteps. And they want everything right now, right then. And we need to have a supply chain that, is solving these issues and these quests, and we can only do it with the right procurement team, with the right supply chain team, and the right suppliers. Without the right suppliers, and that's what I'm telling a lot of procurement teams out there, if you lose your best suppliers out there, you will not be able to serve the customer. So you need to open up, you need to be more collaborative, and that's what everyone in the procurement world is trying to accomplish. And but just to not relay the point, Andy, that every buyer that you now meet as of tomorrow will be that collaborative person. There's still a lot of people that are, a bit backwards minded and maybe very, very tactical. But the general perception of procurement where we should be as a discipline is what I just described. And there's a lot of companies out there that are already there, and some companies that invest heavily in technology and new talent to get there quicker than in the past. So we definitely are going through a transformation and disruption in procurement at the moment.
Okay. So last question. And I said, we're definitely going to do this again soon because I said there's so many unanswered questions. But I think this is so valuable for sellers to begin to understand what's happening in procurement. Is last question for today, just maybe teasing the topic, and I said, we'll come back to it a different time. But so how should sellers begin this process of approaching procurement and forming this collaborative relationship? Because believe me, right now, I think even for a lot of sophisticated sellers, that's kind of low on their priority list, right? When they look at the stakeholders who are really the ones that they think are going to influence the decision the most, procurement comes in at the end, right? We're going to do all the internal selling. We're going to get agreement with our key stakeholders. Let's say you're selling an IT product with the IT director, the CIO, and then we'll brace ourselves to go talk to procurement after we already get internal agreement that we are the choice, right? This is the way 99.9% of sellers look at it. We're going to go get internal agreement with our internal customer, and then we'll grit our teeth and work through procurement. How should they get procurement involved sooner? Should that be through their internal customer, or should they be outreaching directly to procurement, saying, "Look, we're talking to the IT director"? I mean, how should that flow?
Yeah. No, it's a good question, right? So I can only recommend everyone out there, if you haven't made yet contact with a procurement person at your customer, do that right away. And yes, you can do it through your internal stakeholder, your internal direct customer that you have been dealing with so far, or where you have the contact with. They might not know, though, right? In a large company in particular, normally people necessarily know where the procurement department even sits, right? So it is unfortunately true. Because we normally are very consolidated. We are very centrally organized normally. So you could easily talk to someone here in the UK to sell an IT director some software, but all the sourcing, the procurement is maybe done out of the United States. That could easily be the case in large organizations.
Right.
So what I would recommend you do, use your relationships and ask, okay, who is your buying organization? Who is responsible for this particular item? I just want to reach out. But be aware that there might be this political disconnect. The example that I gave you in the very beginning, that there might be an IT person saying, I don't need procurement to be involved, right? This is maybe the measure that they give you when you ask them, hey, no, procurement shouldn't be involved. I can spend my money, I can spend my budget. It's actually not a skill. I'm exaggerating here a bit, but this is the measure that you could be getting, right?
Right.
In that particular case, I would still advise you, somewhat find a different way, maybe through LinkedIn. Procurement people are very active on LinkedIn. Maybe it's because they're always looking for the next job. I don't know, but they're very active on LinkedIn.
Right.
Maybe try to find them there and reach out. Hey, we have a relationship with your company already. We never talked. I wanted to reach out and introduce myself. That could be a very well perceived initial approach. Now, the second thing that I would say is always come prepared. I mean, what probably procurement people hate the most is somebody phoning them up at 1 p.m. on a Friday and saying, "Hey, by the way, we selling XYZ and we're the best and we can help you to do whatever you have to do."
And a contract's landing on your desk on Monday.
Yeah, that as well, right? Yeah, exactly. I think what people probably underestimate is in procurement, probably 80% of what we do is operational stuff that we actually hate. We don't love to do it, but we have to do it. And maybe it's another podcast, Andy, to tell you what that 8% is. But we probably have 20% time only on strategic work, and probably only 10% of that 20% is actually interacting with suppliers. Mm-hmm. So if you phone me up, or if you have a meeting with me, and you ask me a bunch of questions, and I have to explain you what my business is all about, what my challenges are, what my needs are, well, guess what? I'm not going to form that trusting relationship with you. I might probably fall back into my old patterns and be tactical with you because you're just wasting my time. So to understand how procurement operates, right? What their needs are, and there are some specific procurement needs that you can actually fulfill quite easily. In the end of the day, everybody wants to be on a pedestal a bit. I want to go to my CEO and say, "I found that great supplier, Andy can deliver me XYZ, and that will drive sales and enable us to grow the company. I want to be that procurement person that presents Andy within my internal organization, and you can enable me to do that." So these are probably the two quick things that I would say. Try to reach out through all possible avenues to your procurement people, involve them very early on in the process, and come up with when you meet them, already with solution and ideas on how to make them shine internally. Again, cost is really not top of mind. It's many, many, many more factors than just price and price reduction.
Yeah, and I think just to sum up this, and as I said, unfortunately, we're coming to a close. We're definitely doing this again shortly. You can procurement can be a hero internally if they can deliver the business outcome that the internal buyers or the corporation want to achieve. And so as a seller, your job is to help procurement be one of those stakeholders that can deliver those outcomes. And I think for salespeople listening to this, you just have to keep in mind is that we talk about how buying and selling is changing quite a bit. And you also hear me talk about the fact that in many respects, it's changing less than you think. And being that it's still fundamentally a business about relationships and helping people achieve their goals. And yes, procurement is, as Jens has described, procurement is changing in terms of the charter they're being given to become more aligned with the business outcomes, not just focused on cost, but achieving growth. And develop the relationships. They're there to collaborate, to really be an ally if you can help them show the path, just as you are to your internal customer, how you're going to deliver the outcomes that the company or the internal customer want to achieve. And we increasingly train sellers about focusing on outcomes as you work with sellers, or with buyers, excuse me. Procurement is just one of those stakeholders in there that increasingly are oriented the same direction. So, think about that. It's fascinating. I said I have so much more I want to ask, and I said we'll definitely get to it. But I think it's a great introduction for people who are listening to this about you really need to have a different perspective on procurement. And despite what you might be hearing and reading, where people saying, "Look, they're the enemy," it is changing. And they're not the enemy, and you need to find a way to work with them productively because they want to achieve. Increasingly, they are chartered to achieve the same thing that you're trying to achieve. So, excellent, Jens, great. I'm very excited to talk about this because I think it's something that sellers really need to hear, and we'll do this again.
Andy, thank you very much. I'm really passionate about that topic, as you can well imagine.
Yeah.
And hopefully we could help a few salespeople out there to see procurement maybe in a little different light then. So that would already help.
Good. So if people want to learn more about Fivis, that's Fivis, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can always consult us on our website, so fivis.io, Fivis.io, or you can also find me on LinkedIn, Jens Hentschel, with the Fivis Partnership.
Excellent. All right, Jens, thank you very much. We'll look forward to talking to you again shortly.
Thank you, Andy. Have a good time.
Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for this week. First of all, as always, I do want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank my guest, Jens Hentschel. Join me again next week as my guest will be John Crowley. John's the author of a book titled Knuckle Dragging Sales, a primitive process to make more money. And as the title of the book says, we'll be talking about the sales process. And there's certainly a danger in some quarters of making the sales process too complex. I see it in companies all the time. And as a result, actually, companies end up getting in their own way and hurting their own performance. And John's a big advocate for simplifying the sales process, and we're going to dive into his recommendations for how to make that happen next week here on Accelerate. So be sure to join us then. Before you go, don't forget to check out thesaleshouse.com. Take advantage of our special offer at thesaleshouse.com/accelerate. So thanks again for joining me. Until next week, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.